I got interested in mobile development alongside web development. And I was kind of doing React and React Native at the same time. And I
Mm,
thought to myself, well, if I can make a website mobile friendly, can I make it mobile friendly enough that I don't need to keep coding in React Native? The answer is obviously no, not really. But you can get pretty close with progressive web apps, and that's what got me really interested in it. And then I found it had more to it than just the mobile side of things. So it kind of just spiraled off from there. So let's just introduce myself to begin with. I'm a student at Code Chrysalis. I'm from England. I'm not originally from Japan, surprise. I'm also a hobby author, so I like to write sort of fantasy books in my spare time. On the right, or your left, depending on which way around you've mirrored your screen, is me and my wife on our wedding day. So that was a really good day for us. We got married in Japan at, yeah, we had a traditional Japanese wedding. So what are progressive web apps, and the real reason you're watching this? So progressive web apps, although I explained it a little bit before, I think the best way to explain it is that applications designed to work on any device, not just necessarily mobile, iPad, or web browsers and desktops, but the idea is that if you build a web app with this style of a progressive web app, is that it will work on any device, and it should feel like it's working, so like it's been designed for that native application. So if you are running your application on a mobile phone, on an application just for a phone or an iPad, and you design it specifically for that, using specific frameworks and languages that might be suited for that application, it's going to have much better capabilities. And web apps really can't compete in the kind of capabilities that they've all got. So progressive web apps, trying to be the best of both. They're not as compatible with the native device as native apps will be, but they're very close, and they have a load of other advantages we'll be going through compared to native apps, and they have just as much range as web apps, because they are essentially just web apps, but with more capabilities built on top. So let's get... so one of those advantages of a web app is that the progressive web app compared to a normal web app is that it will continue to work even if it's offline. So if you've ever done mobile development, you know that you have to install the app. Normally, you would have to install the app to be able to use it, like something from the App Store or Play Store, depending on which device you have. You download it to your phone, and then you can use it. This is very similar to progressive web apps. You can access them on the internet like a normal web app, as you can see on the left-hand side with the yellow picture, where the application is running, it's connected to Wi-Fi. As you can see on the right-hand side with the blue picture, and the person might be on an airplane or somewhere else where they don't have Wi-Fi, the app continues to run because you can install the app. So what does this mean for businesses? It's quite an important question. So from the design point of view, do our customers actually need it? Will it grow our business, and is it feasible and robust? I'm hoping I can answer some of these questions in my next few slides. So although this is a lot of text, I'll give you some time to just sort of go through it. But just to cover it, essentially, what it's saying is Twitter, Nike, which is this Tokyo Stock Exchange, although it's not on here, also Hulu have tried progressive web apps, and they've seen a really large increase in people returning to their websites or pages or applications compared to when they were just running them as web apps or installable apps on the phone. Because they are able to install their web apps onto people's devices now, people are more likely to come back. Because they're coming back more often, they're seeing increases in sales, subscriptions, tweets, etc. So although that sounds really good to begin with, there are some downsides. So one of the downsides to begin with is that there is a kind of cost hidden behind it. So an SSL certificate, that costs about $400 to $100 a year. So for a business, it's not that much money. But your website should be running with one of these anyway. So what this would look like for your website is, if you take a look at the top address bar here, is that you can see that the address bar starts with HTTPS. This shows that the website is secure and is running an SSL certificate. With this, you know that your credentials are more safe. So if you're inputting a credit card, you should check at the very top to make sure that it has HTTPS as a starting address. That way you know that your credit card details are less likely to be stolen. It's not completely secure, but it's much better. Whereas if you look at the bottom one, it starts with HTTP. It's missing the S. It's not secure. So if you're typing in credit card details or any other personal information, and you notice that the website starts with HTTP, that is much less secure. So that's what the certificate will offer you, is much more security. So just relating back, so how the certificate links to progressive web apps. The whole point of progressive web apps is to make an app that will work across all devices. So it has to be secure. So from the user's point of view, however, what does this mean for them? Why do they want it? Why might your customer or persona, depends what you're working with, why would they actually need a progressive web app rather than two separate applications? So progressive web apps are fast, installable, reliable, and engaging. What you really need to be asking yourself as the product manager is our customer someone who needs our app to be installable? So if you are running, let's say, a shopping website, yeah, it's good enough reason. So you're running a shopping website and the customer is going through your website, checking out all the different things that they can buy. Well, they'll be adding them into the cart. But if they, for some reason, lose connection, or they're in an area with no connection, or they've gone camping, and the Wi-Fi is not great, or it just keeps cutting out, or there's no Wi-Fi, or they will no longer be able to use your website. They don't have access to the internet. But with it being installable and working offline, they can continue to use your website, check things out. So if it's not a shopping app, it might be a photo app. So they can upload their photos to your app, which will queue up. And then when it's connected again back to the internet, the queue can make a push and push those photographs or your shopping cart over to the website, and then you can move and continue. So the idea behind that is that the customer always has access to your application rather than losing access and then probably losing interest later on. You want it to be reliable. That's kind of where we talked about the certificate, trying to keep it safe, to keep it reliable, keep it working, and to keep it engaging. Again, this is where we have that the customer is constantly able to access the application. So really what I'd like to do with you today, just for a quick demonstration, is go over how you might make your application a progressive web app. Because once you've got started, or you're just thinking about designing a web application, or you don't know whether you want to go with a web application and a native mobile app, or whether you want to try a progressive web app, you might not have started this before. As I did say before, this is an introduction. So I'd like to go over some of the tools you can use to test your web application, how to make a progressive web app. We don't have very long, as you can see. So the fact that I'm ready to show you how to build this just shows you how little time and effort you need to put in to go from having a web application that can only be accessed on the internet to a progressive web application, which will be mobile friendly, able to access on any sort of device, installable, and works offline. So these are really good advantages for something that takes a very short amount of time. So our first tool here is Google Lighthouse. Now, this can be found in the console in the developers tools on Google Chrome. It's completely free. You don't have to install anything. You just have to access the console like you would normally, and then you can run the automated tool for measuring the quality of your web application. So what I'd like to do is just head over and just sort of demo that on an application that I've made. So this particular demo is called the Date of Birth Finder. All it does is find the day that you were born if you put in your date of birth. That's not really what we're going to be concentrating on today. It doesn't matter what the application is. The point is that when it's done, if you look into a browser window, as you can see in this picture here, is there'll be a little plus sign, and it should be installable, so you can download it as a desktop application. And for mobile, that will come as a pop-up on the screen when you open it up and ask if you want to install it as a application on your mobile, very similar to if you downloaded something from some sort of website. So if we move over, this is the application in question. And if I just move Zoom out of the way, we're going to ignore everything inside of the actual application itself. What is in here does not matter. What we're going to be looking at is kind of this command console over here. So I believe I've already installed it. Yep, so if I've already installed it onto my desktop, so normally this will be a little plus sign, and it should come up asking you if you'd like to install it. And then it will appear as just a normal shortcut desktop icon on your background, and we should be able to load that. I'd just like to bring your attention over to Lighthouse. So this is just in the Developers tab. And the Lighthouse itself has many different things that it can run. So it's got the mobile and desktop, depending on which one you would like to test it against. I'm going to test it against the desktop this time, but if you'd like to test it against the mobile, just pop it into mobile mode, select mobile, and run it. So you can test the performance, the best practices, the accessibility, etc., etc. But what we're really going to be concentrating on today is the progressive web app side of it. So you can test whether your application works as a progressive web app. So if I just hit generate, it will run some tests on it. It will open and close it a few times, and then it will produce a small report just telling you how good of a progressive web app it is and some tips and information about how you can improve it. So it'll first test whether your application is fast and reliable. So these are the parameters it's expecting your application to have. So does the page respond really quickly? Is the start URL responding when it's offline? So it's come up green here, so it's showing that yes, these things are all correct. It doesn't have any advice for us. It does just have a small note on why this might be important. So is it installable? So it will check whether you can install this application. We've got all green, so this application here is installable. Now, is it optimized as a progressive web app? Is this the best it can be? Now, I've undone some of the code here so we can see what it looks like when you get some, I wouldn't say errors, but you can see where you should make improvements. So this one here is the content size work correctly for viewport. So this particular app might not work for mobile screens perfectly. So I have undone some of the viewport settings so that we could get this to appear, so that it gives you a little bit of kind of advice that maybe this isn't working for every device as it should be. And then down here, we've got a red one. So Manifest doesn't have a maskable icon. So if it appears red, it means that this is something you really should be fixing for it to be a progressive web app. So a maskable icon ensures that the image fills the entire shape without being letterboxed when installing the app on a device. So what this is telling me is that if I install this application on my device, if there's any images on this application, luckily for this application, there is no images, so this won't affect it at all. If there was images on this application, the actual image might not fill the entire shape, and it's not going to look as good as it should be, or it might stretch the image, might overrun the application space, and it'll end up with a scroll bar, so you have to scroll across, and it just won't work well once it's installed. Luckily, ours doesn't have an image, otherwise it would be a little strange to show it right now, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like when you have an error. So if we just move across to code itself, don't worry too much about what the application is made of. It's just a very simple CSS. There's an image in there for the icon, some normal JS and HTML. There's no frameworks in use. This is as bare bones of application as you can get. It's very simple. There's not much going on here. What we're going to look at is actually how to make this application progressive. So the first thing you're going to want is a web app manifest. You don't have to know what's in the code. You don't have to worry about memorizing it. It's a very short, simple Google away. And if you'd like to steal my web app manifest, feel free to do so. There will be a QR code at the end linking to this repository. The web app manifest itself, though, all it's doing is setting up some simple parameters for when it's running offline. So you can see you can set the background color at the top. I've set this to white. That will be the color that displays on the background of the desktop application when it's offline, while the information is loading. Before the CSS loads, that's what they will see. They will see a white background. You can set the display. I've gone with standalone, but you can change that if you'd like. Orientation is portrait. You can pop it to landscape. A short name and a description and what kind of language you're expecting this to be used in. This down here looks like a lot of information, but this is actually the entire web app manifest here in very short, sort of 10 lines. It's not a lot. Below line 10 and beyond is just the different size icons that you can be using for different size screens. You don't have to include this if you are only running for one particular device, but it's always good to include it if you want it to run on many devices. Once you've done that, if you hop into your HTML, if you're using a framework, you might have to look up how that will work for each different framework. I've tried this with Vue and React, and it's very simple. It's just adding a short script at the top of the React or Vue. So in Vue, that you'll add it just normally in the scripts on the mount. And it will run straight away. And what this does is it just imports the service worker. So from line 7 to line 14, you can see here, it imports this service worker and the web app manifest. And this will bring it into your main application so that everything should be running well. So if we take a look at what this service worker is, this is the last piece of the puzzle, the last thing we need to make it run offline is, again, this service worker doesn't need any modifications. You can find this code very easily with a quick Google search about progressive web apps or getting my application to run offline or just the word service worker. Or again, you're welcome to use mine, which will be attached to the QR code at the end. So this service worker here, we won't go over it. It just runs a couple of short functions to be able to cache the data so that it can run offline from the moment you load the page. That's it for the code. Try not to be overwhelmed by it. It is just 2 very small pieces of code that you can just add in as one as a JSON file and one as a JS file, and then just link them into the HTML. It's very easy to look up. There's a couple of Medium articles on this. You're welcome to use mine, as I said at the end. You don't really need to edit it too much, just in the web app manifest. If you want to change some of the styling or the name of your application, you shouldn't need to edit the service worker, but that might depend on whether you have a very large application. But for very simple ones, you shouldn't need to edit it. Once you've just added these, you should be able to run this application offline and you should be able to install it. And that's kind of all you need to make a web app into a installable offline web app, which is some of the criteria for making a progressive web app. That alone doesn't make it a progressive web app. As we discussed before, it will need to be fast, reliable, installable, which is what we just went over, and also work across many devices. That's something you should be doing anyway if you want your application to run both on mobile and desktop. So what makes a good progressive web app? It starts fast, it stays fast. It works in any browser. This is kind of key to getting it to work on all the other devices. If I'm opening it in a different screen size, it obviously has to load and work in that screen size, and it has to be able to work in any browser. So Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, many others I probably don't know or forgotten. It has to be able to work in all of them. Otherwise, it's not really a progressive web app. You've just made a web app for one particular browser. So it has to be responsive to any screen size. I think I just went over that. And it has to provide a custom offline page. That is what we just went over in the code. So if you want to look at the web app manifest, the custom offline page there is showing the sort of styles and what will appear before the code is fully loaded. And last but not least, it has to be installable. If you cannot install the web app, then it won't work offline. And then if it's not a progressive web app, you just have a web application. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. My website is linked in the code on the bottom right, and the GitHub repository is linked in the bottom left. In the GitHub repository, you will have access to not only the website that I was looking at just now. So if we move across, you'll have access to this website. You'll be able to use the application. You'll be able to test it with Lighthouse and get sort of used to those things. You will also be able to play with the application if you like. I assure you, finding the day that you were born, interesting the first time, not so fun the second time. What else you'll have access to on the GitHub repository is you'll have access to this code. So if you couldn't follow along just now looking at the code, you will have access to that code. You can just fork or clone and download that from GitHub. I'm hoping you know how to use GitHub. If not, you can just view the code directly on the website, and you'll be able to copy and paste from there. I'm fully happy with you stealing my code. And if you go over to my website, you'll be able to find many more applications, many more progressive web applications and other applications that you might find an interest in. Maybe you want to start to use them. You'll also find a copy of my CV if you are interested in contacting me at any point in the future. And again, thank you for listening.